London, 1843. No invitation to a ball, no whispered gossip, nor any newspaper article dared to mention what everyone already knew. The marriage of Edric, Duke of Harlington, was glacial. While other nobles cultivated discreet romances and perfumed intrigues beneath crystal chandeliers, the Duke cultivated only duties and ledgers. For him, emotion was disorder, and duty, an elegant way to escape his own heart. His wife, the spirited and generous Duchess Lucy, endured with grace the silent nights and lonely mornings. She tended to the flowers, the servants, and everything except herself, until the day she realized she had become invisible, even to the man who had promised to love her before God and the entire aristocracy. That morning, the Duke awoke to find the pillow still warm and the scent of jasmine lingering in the air. Beside him, a delicate note. Duty may preserve a man's name, but love keeps his soul alive. I shall stay at my grandfather's house until I feel I should return. Do not seek me out. Lucy had departed with the serenity of one who seeks not vengeance, but peace. She was not against duty. She was against negligence disguised as honor. The Duchess's abrupt departure sent ripples through London society. Lady Whistledown's gossip sheet practically burst into flames that morning. "A duchess who abandons her ducal palace is either mad or magnificent," whispered Lady Farnsworth behind her fan at the Pembroke Music Hall. "I wonder which our dear Lucy might be." But those who knew Lucy, truly knew her, understood. Beneath her perfect posture and impeccable manners beat a heart that craved more than grand titles and gilded cages. Back at Harlington House, the Duke stared at the note until the words blurred before his eyes. His first instinct was indignation. How dare she leave without proper discussion, without formal arrangements, without his permission? Yet as the clock ticked loudly in his empty bedchamber, another emotion crept in, one he had not permitted himself to feel in years: fear. The servants noticed it first. The Duke's tea grew cold as he stared out windows. His perfect schedule, once maintained with military precision, now had inexplicable gaps where he simply wandered. "Have the carriage prepared," he ordered his butler one crisp morning, his voice tight with restraint. "Of course, Your Grace. Shall I inform Her Grace's grandfather of your impending arrival?" The Duke paused, pride warring with desperation on his handsome face. "No, I shall not be going there." Duty, after all, did not permit chasing after runaway duchesses, even when every fiber of his being longed to do precisely that. Instead, he immersed himself in work. Ledgers became his companions, parliamentary speeches his solace. If his heart ached when he passed her empty dressing room, no one needed to know. She will return when she tires of her little rebellion, he told himself firmly. A duchess belongs beside her duke. But as days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, even the servants began to whisper. "He doesn't understand what he's lost until it's gone," murmured her lady's maid to the housekeeper. And wasn't that the truth of it all? We never truly value the treasures in our grasp until they slip through our fingers like the finest sand. Lucy, meanwhile, rediscovered joy in the simplicity of her grandfather's country home. There were no grand balls, no social obligations, no need to smile politely when her heart was breaking. Instead, there were wildflowers to gather, village children to teach, and long walks where she could finally hear her own thoughts. "You'll return to him, won't you?" her grandfather asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Lucy's fingers stilled on her embroidery. "When he realizes I'm more than a duty to be fulfilled." The old man nodded sagely. Some men must lose everything before they understand what truly matters. Little did Lucy know that the wheels of fate were already turning, bringing her and her duke to a crossroads neither had anticipated. For what is a love story without a twist of fate to complicate matters further? 1 year later, London was positively buzzing with rumors. Ladies whispered behind silk fans that the Duke appeared paler, quieter, and, imagine, melancholic. A man accustomed to controlling empires now struggled to control his own heart. "Have you seen the Duke lately?" Lady Pembroke asked Countess Hartwell at Lady Danbury's spring soiree. "He's become positively feral. I saw him in the park yesterday without a valet. Without a valet. As if he were some common gentleman." What no one knew was that each night Edric paced the long gallery of Harlington House, pausing before the portrait of his wife. The artist had captured her perfectly. Those intelligent eyes that sparkled with wit, the small smile that suggested she knew secrets the rest of the world did not. "I've been a fool," he whispered to the painted face that could not answer back. The Duke's secretary, Mr. Bennet, noticed the change most acutely. His employer, once the epitome of efficiency, now stared into space during important meetings. Letters remained unanswered, appointments were forgotten. "Your Grace," Bennet ventured one afternoon, "perhaps a short holiday might restore your focus." The Duke looked up from the window where he'd been watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass. "Do you know, Bennet, I've never once taken my wife on a proper holiday." The secretary shifted uncomfortably. "There is still time to remedy that, sir." "Is there?" Edric asked softly. "I'm no longer certain." That evening, as London prepared for Countess Wilmore's annual masquerade ball, the most anticipated event of the season, the Duke made a rare appearance at his club. Lord Kensington found him there, nursing a brandy with uncharacteristic intensity. "Harlington, by God, man, we thought you died and no one had bothered to inform us." The Duke's smile did not reach his eyes. "Not dead, merely reassessing." Kensington dropped into the chair opposite him. "Well, you've chosen an interesting time for introspection. Half of London will be at the Wilmore Ball tonight, including—" He stopped abruptly. "Including whom?" the Duke asked, his voice dangerously soft. Kensington shifted uncomfortably. "Your wife. The Duchess has returned to town. Staying with her cousin, Lady Annabel, I believe." The brandy glass froze halfway to Edric's lips. Lucy, in London, tonight. For the first time in a year, something other than duty stirred in his chest, something wild and unpredictable. Hope. "I find I have a sudden desire to dance," the Duke announced, rising so quickly that Kensington nearly toppled from his chair. 2 hours later, the Wilmore ballroom glittered with candles, jewels, and the dangerous shine of secrets about to be revealed. Behind ornate masks, identities blurred and possibilities expanded. The Duke arrived without announcement, his tall figure commanding attention, despite his understated attire. His mask, simple black, edged with silver, did little to disguise the intensity of his gaze as it swept the room. And then, there she was. Lucy descended the marble staircase with the same jasmine perfume lingering in her wake. But something had changed. She was no longer the neglected wife, but a free woman, confident, radiant. Her gown was the color of midnight, scattered with tiny crystals like stars. Her mask, a delicate creation of silver lace, covered just enough to intrigue, but not enough to hide the determined set of her lovely mouth. Their gazes met across the crowded room, and for a brief moment, the orchestra seemed to lose its rhythm. The crowd parted as the Duke moved toward her, pulled by an invisible thread that had stretched but never broken. "Duchess," he said formally, bowing before her. "Your Grace," she replied, her curtsy precisely the depth required by etiquette, not an inch more. "Would you honor me with this dance?" He extended his hand, aware that 100 pairs of eyes watched them, that tomorrow's gossip sheets would dissect every nuance of this encounter. Lucy hesitated, her gloved fingers hovering above his palm. "I believe I would," she finally said, her voice betraying nothing of her heart. As they took their positions for the waltz, the whispers intensified. "She's returned to him," someone murmured. "No, look at her eyes," another countered. "That's not forgiveness." The music began, and the Duke drew his wife into the familiar pattern of the dance. Close enough to breathe her scent, to feel the warmth of her, yet separated by a gulf of unspoken words. They moved in perfect synchrony, as if their bodies remembered what their minds struggled to reconcile. "You look well," he offered, his voice low. "Country air agrees with me," she replied. "And does country company also agree with you?" he asked, before he could stop himself. A flash of something, amusement, anger, crossed her face. "I've found that sincerity makes for better company than obligation, Your Grace." The barb struck home. The Duke's jaw tightened, but he maintained the smooth flow of the dance. "I've missed you," he said simply. Lucy's step faltered slightly before she recovered. "Have you missed me, or the idea of me? The dutiful Duchess who asked for nothing and accepted less." Around them, other couples danced and laughed, oblivious to the quiet battle being waged in their midst. "I deserve that," Edric conceded. "But perhaps we could speak privately? There is much I wish to—" "The dance is ending, Your Grace," Lucy interrupted, as the final notes of the waltz hung in the air. "And I've promised the next to Lord Pembroke." Before he could respond, she slipped from his arms with a perfect curtsy and disappeared into the crowd, leaving only the ghost of Jasmine in her wake. The Duke stood alone in the center of the ballroom, aware of curious glances and whispered speculation. For the first time in his carefully ordered life, Edric, Duke of Harlington, had no idea what to do next. And isn't that where all great changes begin? In that moment of perfect uncertainty, when the path forward is hidden in shadow? By morning, all of London buzzed with accounts of the Duke and Duchess's dance. 3 times he tried to speak with her after the waltz, reported Lady Farnsworth to her breakfast companions. 3 times she eluded him with such elegant determination that even I was impressed. The poor man looked positively haunted, added Lord Pembroke, who had indeed claimed Lucy for the dance following her encounter with her husband. Though I must say, he has only himself to blame. At Harlington House, the Duke paced his study like a caged predator. The previous night's encounter had shaken him more deeply than he cared to admit. Lucy had changed. The shy, accommodating girl he had married 4 years ago had transformed into a woman of quiet confidence and steely resolve. A woman who no longer looked at him with hopeful eyes, seeking approval he'd been too blind to give. "Bennet," he called sharply. His secretary appeared with remarkable speed. "Yes, Your Grace? I require information. Where exactly is the Duchess staying? What are her plans while in London? Who is in her company? I want to know everything." Bennet's expression remained admirably neutral. "I believe Her Grace is residing with Lady Annabel Cartwright on Grosvenor Square. As for her plans, yes, there are rumors she intends to sail for Italy at the season's end. Lady Annabel has a villa near Florence, I believe. Italy. Halfway across Europe." The thought struck Edric like a physical blow. "That will not do," he muttered. "That will not do at all." Bennet hesitated. "If I might be so bold, Your Grace, perhaps a direct approach? A letter? An invitation to—" "No," the Duke interrupted. "She would refuse a formal overture. I must find another way." That afternoon, Lucy sat in her cousin's drawing room, enduring Annabel's enthusiastic analysis of the previous night's events. "The way he looked at you, like a man dying of thirst who's spotted water. Everyone noticed. Lady Whistledown will certainly have something to say about it." Lucy sighed, setting aside her book. "Annabel, please. It was one dance. One dance that set the ton ablaze with speculation. Will you reconcile? Will you divorce? Will you maintain this exquisite state of dramatic tension forever? The betting books at White's are probably overflowing." "How delightful to know my marital difficulties provide such entertainment," Lucy remarked dryly. Annabel had the grace to look abashed. "I'm sorry, darling. It's just— well, it's rather romantic, isn't it? The cold Duke, suddenly realizing what he's lost." "There's nothing romantic about neglect," Lucy said quietly. "About feeling invisible in your own home. About loving someone who treats you as an afterthought. And yet you still love him," Annabel observed shrewdly. Lucy turned to gaze out the window, where spring was painting London in tentative greens. Sometimes love isn't enough. Then what is? Before Lucy could answer, the butler appeared with a silver tray. A delivery for Her Grace. Upon the tray sat a small package wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with twine rather than ribbon. No card accompanied it. Curious, Lucy unwrapped it to find a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she gasped softly. "What is it?" Annabel demanded, peering over her shoulder. "Poetry," Lucy whispered. "Wordsworth." But it was not just any volume of poetry. It was the exact edition she had been reading the day she first met Edric, sitting in her grandfather's garden. She had quoted a verse about daffodils, and he had finished the stanza from memory. It had been the first moment she'd glimpsed something beyond duty and propriety in the serious young Duke. A flash of the man behind the title. She turned the pages with trembling fingers and found a passage marked with a pressed jasmine flower. The delicate scent rose from the page, transporting her instantly to their wedding day, when he had tucked such a blossom into her hair and whispered, "For luck." The marked verse read, "For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils." Below, in a strong, familiar hand, was written, "I have been blind, but now I begin to see." Lucy closed the book quickly, pressing it to her chest as if to contain the sudden tumult of her heart. "Well?" Annabel prompted. "What does it mean?" "It means," Lucy said slowly, "that the Duke remembers more than I gave him credit for." Across town, Edric waited anxiously for Bennet's return. Had the book been delivered? Had she opened it? Would she understand the message he was trying to convey? Words had never been his strength. Action, duty, responsibility. These were the pillars of his existence. But for Lucy, he would need to find a new language. The language of memory and meaning, of things that mattered beyond ledgers and parliamentary debates. "It's a beginning," he murmured to himself. Just a beginning. That evening, as Lucy prepared for a musical soirée at Lady Danbury's, a second package arrived. This one contained a small watercolor painting of her grandfather's garden, where they had first met. In the corner was painted a single question. "Do you remember?" She remembered all too well. The tall, imposing Duke who had come to discuss some land dispute with her grandfather. How she had spilled lemonade on his impeccable boots and been mortified. How, instead of the anger she'd expected, a hint of amusement had flickered in his eyes before being quickly suppressed. "You are being courted, cousin," Annabel declared delightedly. "By your own husband. How deliciously unusual." Lucy slipped the painting into her drawer, next to the book of poetry. "He thinks gifts will suffice." "Perhaps he doesn't know what else to do," Annabel suggested gently. "Men are notoriously inept at matters of the heart." At Lady Danbury's that night, Lucy was hyper-aware of every entrance, every murmur that might herald her husband's arrival. But the Duke did not appear. Instead, halfway through a particularly tedious piano recital, Lord Kensington dropped into the seat beside her. "The Duke sends his regrets," he said without preamble. Lucy raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware I was expecting him." Kensington grinned. "Of course not, but he wanted you to know he's left London." "Left?" Lucy's heart stuttered. "Where has he gone?" "That, Duchess, is the interesting part." Kensington leaned closer. "He's gone to Thornfield." Thornfield, the small village where her grandfather lived, where she had spent the past year. "Why?" she whispered. Kensington shrugged elegantly. "He mentioned something about understanding roots before growing new leaves. Sounded dreadfully poetic, not like him at all. I think you've driven him slightly mad, Duchess." As the pianist struck the final, triumphant chord of her performance, Lucy sat perfectly still, her mind racing faster than her heart. What game was Edric playing? And more importantly, did she want to join in? The Duke of Harlington, meanwhile, watched through a carriage window as London faded into the distance. Beside him lay a valise packed by his own hands, another first. No valet accompanied him, no secretary, no retinue befitting his station. Just a man, journeying toward understanding, toward his wife's heart. He pulled out the letter he'd received that morning from Mr. Howard, Lucy's grandfather. "If you truly wish to know the woman your wife has become," the old man had written, "then come as a man, not a duke." For the first time in years, duty took second place to a more powerful imperative, love. And so our story takes an unexpected turn, dear reader. For what is more compelling than a powerful man brought low by love? then a cold heart, learning, at last, to burn. Chapter 4. Thornfield Village knew nothing of grand London ballrooms or aristocratic intrigues. Its rhythms followed the sun and seasons, its concerns centered on harvests and weddings, births and deaths. When the Duke's modest carriage, bearing no crest, drawn by only 2 horses, arrived at the village inn, few took notice. The tall, well-dressed gentleman who alighted was assumed to be a businessman, perhaps, or a minor gentleman of no particular consequence. And for the first time since inheriting his title at the tender age of 19, Edric found himself unremarkable. No bowing innkeeper, no scrambling servants. Just a nod, a request for a room, and the simple question, "Your name, sir, for our register?" He hesitated only briefly. "Mr. Harlington," he replied, using his family name without its ducal weight. The modest room beneath the eaves bore no resemblance to his London chambers. The bed was narrow, the washstand plain, the view overlooking not manicured gardens, but the village green where geese wandered freely. Edric stood at the window, watching as villagers went about their evening business. Somewhere among these thatched cottages and narrow lanes, his wife had built a life without him, had found contentment he had failed to provide. The thought was humbling. What now? He murmured to himself. He had no plan beyond arrival, no strategy for what should come next. Such unpreparedness was foreign to his nature, yet strangely liberating. The next morning, he rose early, a habit born of discipline rather than necessity, and ventured into the village. The May sunshine cast everything in a gentle light. Children played, dogs barked, women gossiped by the well. It was at the bakery that he first heard her name mentioned. "Duchess sent word she'll be by later for those reading primers," the baker told his wife, as Edric purchased a roll. "The school children adore those stories she writes for them." Stories? His Lucy wrote stories? This was news to him. "Excuse me," he ventured. "You mentioned a duchess." The baker eyed him curiously. "Lady Lucy. Stays with old Mr. Howard up at Hawthorne Cottage. Not that she puts on airs about being a duchess, mind. Comes to market same as anyone, helps with the sick, teaches the little ones to read. A remarkable woman," Edric said softly. "That she is. A shame about her marriage." The baker's wife nudged her husband sharply, but he continued. "What? Everyone knows the Duke's a cold fish who didn't appreciate what he had." Edric nearly choked on his roll. "Indeed. And how does everyone know this?" The baker shrugged. "Her Grace never says a word against him, which tells its own tale. Besides, what kind of husband lets his wife live in a cottage for a year without coming after her? The kind who believed duty superseded feeling. The kind who had forgotten that marriage was more than a social contract. The kind who had taken for granted the greatest gift he'd ever received. Perhaps, Edric suggested carefully. The Duke didn't know how to make amends. "Seems simple enough to me," the baker replied. "Admit you were wrong, promise to do better, and mean it. Works with the missus every time." He grinned at his wife, who rolled her eyes affectionately. Simple indeed. Yet why did it feel so monumental? Edric continued his exploration of the village, gathering pieces of Lucy like precious stones. The elderly woman who praised her kindness during a recent illness. The shopkeeper who mentioned her regular purchases of paper and ink. The seamstress who commented on her preference for simpler styles these days. "She seems happy here," he remarked to the village blacksmith, who was re-showing a placid mare. The burly man looked up. "Happy enough, but not complete-like, if you take my meaning. Sometimes she stands at the edge of the meadow, looking toward London. Makes a man wonder what, or who, she's missing." Hope fluttered in Edric's chest, fragile as a new leaf. His wanderings eventually led him to a small stone building with a slate roof. The village school, he presumed. Through the open windows came the sound of children's voices, and one adult voice that stopped him in his tracks. Lucy's voice, reading aloud with animation and warmth. The dragon wasn't fearsome at all, she read. He was simply misunderstood. What he needed most wasn't gold or princesses, but a friend who could see beyond his scaly exterior to the gentle heart within. Edric moved closer, drawn irresistibly, and peered through the window. There sat his Duchess on a simple wooden chair, surrounded by village children on rough benches. Her hair was loosely braided rather than elaborately styled, her dress plain blue cotton instead of silk or satin. Yet she had never looked more beautiful to him. One little girl raised her hand. "Lady Lucy, do you think all scary things are just misunderstood?" Lucy considered this seriously. "Not all. Some dangers are real. But often, what frightens us most is what we don't understand, or what reminds us of our own weaknesses. Like the Duke in last week's story," piped up a boy of about 8. "The one who couldn't say what was in his heart?" Edric froze. Lucy's cheeks colored slightly. "Yes, Thomas. Rather like him." "I think he'll learn," declared a tiny girl with solemn eyes. "People can change if they try hard enough." "That's very wise, Sarah," Lucy said softly. "I believe that too." Unable to bear any more, Edric backed away from the window. His wife was turning their story into lessons for children, their private pain transformed into parables of growth and understanding. He waited at a distance until the lesson concluded and the children dispersed, watching as Lucy gathered her books and papers. When she emerged from the schoolhouse, he stepped forward, suddenly uncertain of his welcome. "Lucy," he said simply. She stopped short, her books nearly tumbling from her grasp. "Edric, what are you? How did you—" "Your grandfather wrote to me," he admitted. "Invited me to come, to see the life you've made here." She clutched her books tighter, as if they might shield her heart. "And what do you think of our humble village, Your Grace?" "Please," he said quickly, "no titles here. I'm just Edric. And I think it's honest, real. I think you've found something I've been missing all my life without realizing it." Lucy studied him, the lack of valet-perfect attire, the hint of stubble on his jaw, the vulnerability in his eyes. "Why are you really here?" "Because I've been a fool," he said simply. "Because I want to understand who you are now, who we could be together. Because—" He broke off, aware they were attracting curious glances from passers-by. Lucy seemed to notice the attention too. "This isn't the place. Come to Hawthorne Cottage at 4. Grandfather takes his afternoon nap then. We can talk." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Edric nodded, watching as she continued down the lane, her back straight, her steps purposeful. 4 o'clock suddenly seemed very far away. To fill the intervening hours, he did something he had never done before. He wandered without purpose, sat by the village stream, watched clouds form and dissolve overhead, contemplated how a man raised to value property and position above all else could have so thoroughly miscalculated the true treasures in life. At precisely 4 o'clock, he stood at the garden gate of Hawthorne Cottage. The modest stone house was nearly obscured by climbing roses and honeysuckle. A riot of spring flowers filled the beds. Bees hummed lazily in the afternoon sunshine. Before he could knock, Lucy appeared in the doorway. She'd changed into a simple cream muslin dress, her hair now completely loose around her shoulders. She looked younger somehow. Unguarded. "Grandfather is sleeping," she said quietly. "We can sit in the garden." She led him to a wooden bench beneath an ancient oak tree. The same bench, he realized with a pang, where they had first met 5 years ago. Where she had quoted Wordsworth and smiled at him with unguarded delight. "You remembered," she said, noticing the direction of his gaze. "The poetry book you sent?" "I remember everything," he said simply, though I didn't always understand the importance of what I was seeing. A robin landed on the garden path, tilting its head inquisitively before hopping away. "Why now, Edric?" Lucy asked, her voice gentle but direct. "Why come here after a year of silence?" He had rehearsed explanations, justifications, even apologies on the journey to Thornfield. Now, face to face with his wife in the dappled shade of an oak tree, only the unvarnished truth would do. "Because I'm half a person without you," he said. "Because duty without love is an empty vessel. Because I want to become someone worthy of your heart." Lucy's eyes widened at his directness. "Those don't sound like the Duke's words." "They're not. They're mine. the man beneath the title, the one who's been hiding for far too long. She studied his face as if searching for evidence of sincerity. "And what of your responsibilities? Your estates? Parliament?" "They'll wait," he said simply. "Some things are more important." A breeze stirred the leaves above them, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across their faces. "I don't know if I can trust this change," Lucy admitted softly. "A few pretty words and gestures don't erase a year of separation. 4 years of emotional neglect before that." Edric nodded, accepting the justice of her words. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness. Only time. A chance to show you that I can be more than the man you left. And if I refuse? If I say it's too late?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. "Then I will have at least known what it means to truly try," he answered. "To fight for something more precious than titles or land or reputation." Lucy looked away, her profile delicate against the green backdrop of the garden. "I need time to think." "Of course. I've taken a room at the village inn. I'll stay as long as necessary. A day, a week." He hesitated. A lifetime. As he rose to leave, Lucy caught his hand. The first touch they had shared in a year that wasn't governed by the formal rules of a dance. "The village fair is tomorrow," she said. "Everyone will be there. If you truly want to understand my life here, I'll be there," he promised. Their fingers lingered together a moment longer before parting. As Edric walked back toward the village, he felt lighter somehow, as if by admitting his failures, he had shed a burden he hadn't known he carried. Behind him, Lucy watched his retreating figure, her thoughts in turmoil. The man who had just sat beside her bore little resemblance to the cold, distant husband she had left. His eyes, his voice, even his posture had changed. But could she trust this transformation? Or would the Duke eventually reclaim the man, burying Edric once more beneath duty and decorum? Only time would tell. And time, at least, was something they both now had in abundance. For what greater luxury is there than time to discover if a heart once broken can truly mend? The Thornfield Village Fair transformed the usually quiet green into a bustling hive of activity. Stalls, selling everything from ribbon to honey, lined the perimeter. Children darted between adults, sticky-faced from treats. Musicians played lively country tunes that set feet tapping. It was a world away from the sedate entertainments of London society, where every movement was calculated, every remark noted and judged. Here was life in its unvarnished glory, boisterous, unpretentious, joyful. Edric arrived as the sun reached its zenith, feeling oddly self-conscious in his simple attire. Without his ducal trappings, would Lucy even notice him in the crowd? His concern proved unnecessary. She found him almost immediately, appearing at his side with a small girl in tow. "You came," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "I promised I would." The child tugged at Lucy's skirt. "Is this him, Lady Lucy? The Duke from your stories?" Lucy's cheeks flushed becomingly. "Sarah, this is Mr. Harlington, a friend from London." Edric knelt to the child's level, a gesture that would have been unthinkable for the Duke of Harlington a month ago. "Hello, Sarah. I believe we've met before, in a way. I heard you at the schoolhouse yesterday." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're the one who needs to learn to speak from his heart." Lucy made a strangled sound that might have been embarrassment or laughter. "Sarah, why don't you find your mother? I believe she's selling jam by the church." Once the child had scampered off, Lucy turned to Edric with a mix of mortification and defiance. "Children have remarkable memories, don't they? And your stories have remarkable parallels to certain dukes of my acquaintance," he replied, a smile tugging at his lips. For a moment they stood in awkward silence, the festive atmosphere swirling around them. "Would you—" They both began simultaneously, then stopped. "Please," Edric gestured for her to continue. "Would you like to see the fair? It's nothing grand, but the villagers work all year for this day." He offered his arm, an instinctive courtesy. To his surprise and pleasure, she took it, her touch light but present. Together they wandered through the fair. Lucy greeted everyone by name, inquiring after ailments and relatives with genuine interest. Edric watched, fascinated, as she moved through the crowd with the same grace she had shown at the most exclusive London gatherings, yet with none of the artifice. "Lady Lucy," called a matronly woman selling pies, "you must try my gooseberry this year. And who's this handsome gentleman? Not keeping secrets from us, are you? Mrs. Thwaite, this is Mr. Harlington from London." "Mr. Harlington, Mrs. Thwaite makes the finest pies in 3 counties." The woman beamed, cutting generous slices for them both. Edric bit into his, the tart sweetness exploding on his tongue. "This is extraordinary," he said with genuine appreciation. "Hear that, Ned?" Mrs. Thwaite called to her husband. "A London gentleman thinks my pies are extraordinary." As they continued their circuit, Edric noticed something remarkable. No one bowed to Lucy or called her "Your Grace." Yet the respect they showed her was deeper than any court formality. It was the respect earned through genuine connection, not demanded by rank. "You've become part of this place," he observed, as they paused to watch children competing in sack races. "I have," she agreed. "Here, I'm valued for what I do, not who I married." The words stung, but Edric acknowledged their truth with a nod. "I deserved that." "It wasn't meant as a barb," Lucy said, softer now. "Merely a truth I've come to understand. In London, I was always the Duke's wife. Here, I'm just Lucy, who happens to have a title no one uses." Before he could respond, shouts erupted from the far end of the green. A horse had broken free from its tether and was galloping toward the children's games, panicked by some unseen stimulus. Without hesitation, Edric sprinted forward. Years of horsemanship took over as he positioned himself in the animal's path, his movements calm and authoritative despite the danger. Speaking in low, soothing tones, he caught the trailing reins and gradually brought the frightened beast under control. As the horse's breathing steadied, Edric became aware of the silence that had fallen over the fair. Every eye was upon him, including Lucy's, her expression a mixture of admiration and something deeper, more complex. "That was well done, sir," said the village blacksmith, hurrying forward to take the horse. Most city gentlemen would have run the other way. Edric handed over the reins. "It was nothing. I've worked with horses all my life." "Worked with them, have you? Not just ridden them to hunt foxes?" The blacksmith gave him a shrewd look. "My father believed a man should understand all aspects of his world," Edric replied, thinking of the gruff duke who had insisted his heir learn everything from stable management to crop rotation. Lessons he had taken for granted at the time. As the excitement subsided and the fair resumed its festivities, Lucy approached. A smudge of dirt marked her cheek, and without thinking, Edric reached out to brush it away. His fingertips lingered against her skin, the simple contact more intimate than any they had shared in years. "You might have been hurt," she said quietly. "Worth the risk," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Something shifted between them in that moment, a crack in the wall Lucy had built around her heart. The Duke would have noted the strategic advantage and pressed forward. But Edric, the man learning to emerge from behind the title, simply let the moment exist, precious and unforced. As afternoon mellowed into evening, lanterns were lit around the green. The music changed from lively jigs to gentler melodies. Couples began to dance on the makeshift floor of trampled grass. "Will you dance with me, Lucy?" Edric asked, extending his hand. Not as Duke and Duchess, just as a man asking a woman he admires. Lucy hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "One dance, Mr. Harlington." They joined the other couples, their movements naturally falling into harmony despite the unfamiliar country steps. It was nothing like the formal patterns of a London ballroom, yet infinitely more meaningful. "Do you remember our first dance?" Edric asked as they circled each other. "At Lady Pembroke's ball. You were so stiff and proper, I thought you'd break if someone bumped into you." He laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and warm. "I was terrified. The most beautiful woman in the room had agreed to dance with me, and I was certain I'd tread on your toes or say something impossibly dull." "You did tread on my toes," Lucy reminded him. "Twice. Did I apologize properly?" "You said, 'Forgive the imposition, Miss Howard.' as if stepping on my foot was a business transaction gone awry. They both laughed then, the shared memory building a fragile bridge across the chasm of their estrangement. As the music drew to a close, neither moved to separate. Around them, villagers watched with barely concealed interest, whispering behind hands and nodding approvingly. "They're matchmaking," Lucy murmured, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Should we tell them we're already married? And spoil their fun? Besides," she added more softly, "sometimes I wonder if we truly know what it means to be married, to be partners in more than name." The honesty of her words hung between them, a challenge and an invitation. "I'd like to learn," Edric said simply, "with you." Before Lucy could respond, her grandfather appeared, his aged face creased with concern. "There you are, my dear. I hate to interrupt, but Mrs. Fenwick's time has come, and there are complications. She's asking for you." Lucy immediately shifted from wistful young woman to capable caregiver. "I'll come at once. Edric, I must go. Mrs. Fenwick is having her first child and—" "Go," he said, understanding instantly. Lives matter more than conversations. She searched his face, perhaps looking for signs of the old Duke who would have considered such matters beneath her station. Finding none, she nodded once and hurried away with her grandfather. Edric watched her go, feeling neither abandonment nor irritation, only pride in the woman who had found purpose beyond ballrooms and tea tables. Later that night, unable to sleep in his narrow inn bed, he stood at the window watching as a storm rolled in from the west. Rain began to lash against the glass, and thunder rumbled in the distance. A knock at his door startled him from his contemplation. Opening it, he found Lucy standing there, drenched from the rain, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "May I come in?" she asked simply. He stepped aside immediately, concern overriding propriety. "Of course. What's happened? Is Mrs. Fenwick—" "She's well. The baby, too, a healthy boy, after 20 hours of labor." Lucy shivered, water pooling at her feet. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late. I needed—" Without a word, Edric wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her to the room's single chair. He poured a glass of brandy from his small traveling flask and pressed it into her trembling hands. "Drink," he urged gently. "It will warm you." She obeyed, grimacing slightly at the strong spirit. "Thank you. What can I do?" he asked, kneeling before her. "Tell me how to help." Lucy looked at him, truly looked, as if seeing past the handsome features to the man beneath. "You already are," she said softly. "Just by being here, by listening, by caring." They stayed like that, in companionable silence, as the storm raged outside and Lucy gradually warmed. There was no need for words, no pressure to explain or justify her presence in his room at such an hour. Eventually, she spoke. "I've attended births before, but never one so difficult. There was a moment when I thought we might lose them both, but you didn't. Because you were there." She shook her head. "I'm not a doctor or a midwife. I just held her hand, wiped her brow, told her she was strong enough to endure." "Sometimes that's the most important medicine," Edric said. "Knowing someone believes in you when you've lost faith in yourself." Their eyes met, and a current of understanding passed between them. "I should go," Lucy said eventually, rising from the chair. "Grandfather will worry." "Let me walk you home," Edric offered, reaching for his coat. "No need. The rain has stopped, and it's only a short distance." At the door, she paused, turning back to him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you. For understanding. For not being the Duke tonight. I'm learning that the man might be worth more than the title," he replied. Lucy smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Perhaps he is." She left then, disappearing into the night. But something remained in the room with Edric, something that felt remarkably like hope. For what greater transformation can there be than discovering the person you were always meant to become? The next morning dawned clear and fresh, as if the night's storm had washed away more than just dust from the village streets. Edric woke earlier than usual, his mind alive with possibilities. Something had changed between him and Lucy during those quiet moments in his simple room. Not a dramatic reconciliation, but a shift in the foundation of their relationship. For the first time, they had seen each other clearly, without the distortions of title or expectation. He dressed quickly, foregoing his usual precise routine. The Duke of Harlington would never appear in public without a perfectly tied cravat and immaculate attire. But Edric, the man rediscovering himself in this village, cared more about substance than appearance. At breakfast in the inn's small dining room, he found himself approached by the village doctor, a weathered man with kind eyes and capable hands. "Mr. Harlington, isn't it? I'm Dr. Peters. I understand you're acquainted with Lady Lucy." Edric nodded, gesturing for the doctor to join him. "I am indeed. How is Mrs. Fenwick this morning?" "Recovering well, thanks in no small part to her Grace's assistance. Not many fine ladies would stay through such a difficult birth, you know. Especially not with their own hands in the thick of it." Edric struggled to reconcile this image with the sheltered young woman he had married. Lucy has always had a caring heart. "More than that," the doctor said, buttering a piece of toast. "She has a gift for healing. Not just bodies, but spirits. The villagers adore her." "As do I," Edric admitted quietly. The doctor studied him with shrewd eyes. "Forgive my impertinence, sir, but you speak of her with particular warmth. Are you perhaps a suitor?" The question caught Edric off guard. In this small village, away from London's gossip machine, his true identity remained unknown. Here, he was simply a gentleman showing interest in a lady of quality. "It's complicated," he replied carefully. "Ah," the doctor nodded sagely. "The best relationships often are. Well, a word of advice from an old man who's seen more of life than most. When you find someone who makes your world larger rather than smaller, hold on with both hands." After breakfast, Edric found himself drawn to Hawthorne Cottage once more. The garden gate stood open invitingly, but there was no sign of Lucy or her grandfather. Instead, he encountered a young maid hanging laundry on a line stretched between apple trees. "Good morning," he called. "I was hoping to speak with Lady Lucy." The girl bobbed a quick curtsy. "She's gone to the meadow, sir, for the wildflowers. Says they're best picked with morning dew still on them." Following her directions, Edric walked beyond the village boundaries to where open meadows rolled toward distant woods. The grass, still wet from last night's rain, soaked the hem of his trousers, but he found he didn't mind. He spotted Lucy in the distance, a solitary figure in a simple dress the color of spring leaves. She moved through the tall grass with graceful purpose, bending occasionally to gather flowers into the basket over her arm. For a moment, he simply watched her, struck by how perfectly she belonged in this pastoral scene. In London, she had always seemed slightly constrained, like a wild bird in an elegant cage. Here, she moved with the freedom of one who has found her true element. As if sensing his presence, Lucy turned. The morning sunlight caught in her loose hair, turning it to spun gold. "Edric," she said, neither surprised nor displeased to see him. "Have you come flower-picking as well?" He closed the distance between them, noting the variety of blooms already in her basket. "I confess I know little about wildflowers, beyond their beauty." "Then you've much to learn," she replied, a teasing light in her eyes. "This one," she held up a delicate blue blossom, "is forget-me-not, and these," she pointed to tiny white flowers, "are stitchwort. Grandfather uses them in his remedies for rheumatism." "Your grandfather is a healer?" "Of sorts. Not formally trained like Dr. Peters, but the villagers trust his knowledge of herbs and poultices." She bent to gather a spray of purple flowers. "These are wild violets. They make a lovely syrup for coughs." Edric found himself fascinated by this hidden knowledge, so different from the subjects that had occupied his education. "Will you teach me?" he asked impulsively. Lucy looked up, clearly surprised by the request. "You want to learn about wildflowers and herbal remedies?" "I want to learn about the things that matter to you," he said simply. Something softened in her expression. "Very well. Lesson 1. Always take only what you need, and never the roots if you wish the flowers to return next year." They spent the next hour moving through the meadow together, Lucy naming each plant and explaining its properties, Edric listening with genuine interest. When her basket was full, they sat on a fallen log at the meadow's edge, the morning sun warming their shoulders. "I never knew you had such knowledge of plants," Edric remarked. "In London, you seemed content with arranging the hothouse flowers the gardeners provided." Lucy twisted a blade of grass between her fingers. "There are many things you never knew about me, Edric, just as there were parts of yourself you never showed me." The observation held no bitterness, only quiet truth. "I'd like to change that," he said. "For both of us." She studied him thoughtfully. "Why did you really come to Thornfield? The truth, please." Edric looked out over the sun-dappled meadow, gathering his thoughts. "When you left, I told myself you were being selfish, that you had abandoned your duties for your own comfort." He shook his head ruefully. "It took months for me to realize the selfishness was mine. I had reduced our marriage to a series of obligations, forgetting that it should be a partnership of hearts as well as names. And now?" Lucy prompted softly. "Now I understand what I nearly lost through my blindness, what I still may have lost." He turned to face her directly. "I didn't come here to reclaim you as a possession, Lucy. I came to discover if the man I truly am could be worthy of the woman you truly are." A butterfly landed briefly on Lucy's basket before fluttering away, a moment of perfect, ephemeral beauty. "And have you discovered anything of note in your investigations?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the weight of the question. "That you are stronger, more capable, and more compassionate than I ever gave you credit for. That this village sees in you what I was too preoccupied to notice." He paused, then added softly, "That I have never loved you more than I do at this moment." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Lucy's eyes widened, and for a moment Edric feared he had spoken too boldly. But when she replied, her voice was steady. "Love was never our problem, Edric. Even in the coldest days of our marriage, I believe there was love. Buried deep, perhaps, but present. The question was always whether that love would be enough to bridge the distance between duty and happiness. And now?" He echoed her earlier question. She rose, gathering her basket. "Now, I don't know. But I'm willing to find out." It wasn't the passionate reunion he might once have scripted in his mind, but it was something far more valuable, a beginning based on truth rather than expectation. As they walked back toward the village, side by side but not quite touching, Edric felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the dukedom, of societal obligations, of rigid self-control seemed less burdensome in this place where titles meant little and character everything. At the cottage gate, Lucy paused. "Grandfather and I dine simply at 1:00. Would you care to join us?" The invitation, so ordinary yet so meaningful, brought a smile to his face. "I would be honored." "Don't expect a ducal feast," she warned, a hint of humor in her tone. "Just honest food at an honest table." "Nothing could appeal to me more," he replied, and meant it. As he walked back to the village inn to pass the intervening hours, Edric reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he would have considered a simple country meal beneath his station. Now he anticipated it more eagerly than any elaborate banquet in London. Was this growth, or merely the shedding of pretensions he should never have adopted? Perhaps, he mused, they were one and the same. At precisely 1:00, Edric presented himself at Hawthorne Cottage, a bottle of the inn's modest but respectable wine in hand. The door was opened not by a servant, but by Lucy herself, her hair now neatly braided and pinned, her dress changed for one slightly more formal, though still far simpler than her London wardrobe. "Welcome," she said, with the warmth of a true hostess rather than the practiced courtesy of a duchess. The cottage's interior was snug but comfortable, filled with books, dried herbs hanging from beams, and well-worn furniture that invited relaxation rather than admiration. In the small dining room, the table was set with simple pottery rather than fine china. Mr. Howard, Lucy's grandfather, greeted him with a firm handshake and keen eyes that missed nothing. "So you've come at last, Your Grace." Edric started at the use of his title. "You know who I am." The old man chuckled. Of course. Did you think an old campaigner like me wouldn't recognize the Duke of Harlington, even without his finery? I fought alongside your father in the peninsula, boy. Grandfather, Lucy admonished gently, you promised to give him a fair hearing, and so I shall. Mr. Howard agreed, gesturing for Edric to take a seat. But let's not pretend this is an ordinary visit from an ordinary gentleman. Too much is at stake for such games. The meal that followed was indeed simple. Roast chicken, fresh vegetables from the garden, bread still warm from the oven, but more satisfying than any Edric could remember. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on village affairs, books they had read, even cautious reminiscences of shared experiences. It was during the apple tart that Mr. Howard fixed Edric with a penetrating stare. Tell me, Duke, what do you think of our little Thornfield? I think it has taught me more in 3 days than London did in 30 years, Edric replied honestly, about what matters, about who I might become, if given the chance. The old man nodded slowly. And my granddaughter? What have you learned about her? Lucy made a small sound of protest, but her grandfather held up a hand. No, my dear. Let him answer. I think we'd all like to hear it. Edric set down his fork, considering his words carefully. I've learned that I married a remarkable woman and then failed to see her clearly, that Lucy has depths of courage, wisdom, and compassion I never fully appreciated, that she has built a meaningful life here while I constructed an empty one in London. He turned to Lucy, whose cheeks had flushed at his words. Most importantly, I've learned that a title without a heart behind it is merely an empty word, and that I would rather be a man worthy of your respect than a duke worthy of society's admiration. A long silence followed his declaration. Then, to Edric's surprise, Mr. Howard burst into laughter, warm, genuine laughter that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Well said, boy. Very well said indeed. He rose from the table with the spryness of a much younger man. Now I believe I'll take my afternoon constitutional. The lane along the stream is particularly lovely this time of year. I may be gone. Oh, an hour at least. With that less than subtle hint, he collected his walking stick and departed, leaving Edric and Lucy alone at the table. I apologize for Grandfather, Lucy said once the door had closed. He's never been one for social niceties. I find his directness refreshing, Edric replied. In London, people rarely say what they truly mean. And what do you truly mean, Edric? Lucy asked softly. Beyond the pretty words and gestures, what is it you want? It was the question that had haunted him since her departure. What did he want? The dutiful Duchess restored to her proper place? The familiar comfort of a shared name and separate lives? Or something deeper, more challenging, more complete? I want a second chance, he said finally. Not to continue as we were, but to begin again. To build something real together, whether in London or here or wherever we might find happiness. Lucy's hands trembled slightly as she folded her napkin. And if I'm not ready? If I need more time to trust that this change in you is lasting? Then I will wait, he said simply. For as long as necessary. She looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she reached across the table and, very gently, placed her hand atop his. I think, she said carefully, that I would like to try. It wasn't a declaration of undying love. It wasn't a promise of immediate reconciliation. It was something far more precious, a fragile bridge across the chasm that had separated them. And as Edric turned his hand to clasp hers, he knew it was enough. For now, it was more than enough. For what is love, if not the courage to begin again, even when the path forward is uncertain? Days in Thornfield took on a gentle rhythm, unlike anything Edric had experienced in his structured London life. Mornings often found him walking with Lucy through the village or helping in her grandfather's garden. Activities that would have seemed beneath the Duke's dignity a month ago. Afternoons might bring visits to ailing villagers, where he observed Lucy's natural gift for comfort, or quiet hours reading in the cottage's small library. Evenings frequently ended with simple dinners and conversation that ranged from philosophy to village gossip, each topic given equal weight and consideration. Through it all, Edric and Lucy circled each other with cautious hope, rebuilding trust one small moment at a time. "You have soil on your cheek," Lucy noted with amusement one morning as Edric straightened from planting herbs in a sunny corner of the garden. Without thinking, he rubbed his face, succeeding only in smearing the dirt further. Lucy laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that warmed him more than the spring sunshine. "Here," she said, stepping closer with a handkerchief. Her fingers were gentle as she wiped away the smudge, her face close enough that he could count the freckles across the bridge of her nose. "Thank you," he said softly. She stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "You've changed, Edric. A month ago, you would have been horrified at the thought of dirt on your ducal person. A month ago, I was a fool," he replied simply. Their gazes held for a moment, before Lucy turned away, but not before he glimpsed something in her eyes that kindled hope in his chest. Later that week, a letter arrived from London, the first communication to breach the peaceful bubble of their Thornfield existence. Edric recognized Bennet's precise handwriting instantly. He opened it with a strange reluctance, aware that the outside world still existed, still had claims upon him that could not be indefinitely deferred. "Bad news?" Lucy asked, noting his expression as he read. "Not bad," he replied carefully. "Just pressing. Parliament reconvenes next week. There are matters requiring my attention." "Of course," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You have responsibilities." The word hung between them, loaded with history. Responsibilities had been the altar upon which their happiness had been sacrificed once before. "They can wait a little longer," Edric decided, folding the letter and placing it in his pocket. Lucy shook her head. "No, they can't, and they shouldn't. Being Duke of Harlington isn't just a title, Edric. It's a trust. Thousands of people depend on your voice in Parliament, your management of the estates." Her understanding of his position, of the weight he carried, moved him deeply. "Come with me," he said impulsively. "Back to London." Her eyes widened. "Edric, not as my Duchess returning to her duties," he clarified quickly, "but as my partner, my equal. Come and see if what we've found here can flourish there as well." Lucy twisted her hands together, uncertainty plain on her face. "I don't know if I'm ready to face London society again. The whispers, the speculation. We'll face them together," Edric promised. "And if it becomes too much, we'll return here. Thornfield will always be our haven now. Our haven." The simple phrase encompassed so much: a shared refuge, a mutual attachment, a future that included both their worlds. "I'll think about it," Lucy said finally. "Give me a day?" He nodded, respecting her need for space to make this crucial decision. "Of course." That evening, unable to settle to his usual reading, Edric walked to the village church, a simple stone building that had stood for centuries. Inside, the fading daylight filtered through stained glass, casting pools of color across worn flagstones. He was surprised to find Mr. Howard sitting quietly in a rear pew, his weathered hands folded in contemplation. "Seeking guidance, Duke?" the old man asked without turning. Edric slid into the pew beside him. "Perhaps, though I'm not certain I've earned the right to ask for divine intervention." Mr. Howard chuckled softly. "God's grace isn't earned, boy. That's rather the point of it." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before the older man spoke again. "You've asked Lucy to return to London with you." It wasn't a question, but Edric answered anyway. "Yes. Not as a demand, but as an invitation, a chance to see if what we've rebuilt here can survive in that world as well. And if it can't?" The question was direct, challenging. Edric considered it carefully. "Then I will have a choice to make," he said finally. "Between the life I was born to and the life I want." Mr. Howard nodded slowly. "A difficult crossroads for any man, more so for a duke with centuries of tradition on his shoulders." "What would you do?" Edric asked, genuinely curious. The old man's eyes twinkled. "Me? I made my choice long ago, when I resigned my commission to marry a girl my family deemed unsuitable. Never regretted it, not for a single day." "Lucy's grandmother?" "Indeed." The daughter of a country doctor, with more intelligence than fortune. My father threatened disinheritance if I went through with it. He smiled at the memory. We had 40 wonderful years together before she passed, raised a daughter who gave us Lucy. I'd say it was worth the sacrifice. Did you ever miss it? Edric asked. The life you left behind? Occasionally, Mr. Howard admitted. There are moments when position and privilege would have been convenient. But comfort isn't the same as happiness, Duke. Never has been. As they emerged from the church into the gathering dusk, Mr. Howard paused, resting a hand on Edric's shoulder. Whatever Lucy decides, remember this. True love doesn't ask us to be less than we are. It challenges us to become more. With that enigmatic advice, he nodded goodnight and made his way back toward the cottage, leaving Edric to ponder his words under a sky filling with early stars. The next morning, Edric woke to a tap at his in-room door. Opening it, he found Lucy standing there, a determined set to her jaw. I've decided, she said without preamble. I'll go to London with you. Joy surged through him, but he tempered it with caution. You're certain? No, she admitted with a small smile. I'm terrified. But some things are worth facing fear for. He reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. Thank you for trusting me this far. I promise I won't let you regret it. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep, she said softly. Just try. That's all I ask. They departed 2 days later in Edric's carriage, which Bennet had dispatched from London. Lucy bid a tearful farewell to her grandfather, who stood at the cottage gate waving until they were out of sight. As the village of Thornfield receded behind them, Lucy gazed back with visible emotion. We'll return, Edric assured her, whenever you wish it. It's not just the place I'll miss, she explained. It's the freedom, the simplicity. Perhaps we can bring some of that simplicity back to London with us, he suggested. Lucy's smile was tinged with skepticism. London and simplicity are rarely mentioned in the same breath, Your Grace. Please, he said quickly. Not Your Grace. Not between us. We've come too far for such formality. She studied him for a long moment before nodding. Very well. Edric. The journey to London took 2 days, during which they rediscovered the pleasure of uninterrupted conversation. Lucy shared stories of her childhood, of dreams she had set aside upon marriage. Edric spoke of the weight of inheriting the dukedom at 19, of fears he had never acknowledged even to himself. With each revelation, the distance between them diminished further. I never knew you felt so unprepared for the title, Lucy remarked as their carriage passed through increasingly populated areas, signaling their approach to the capital. You always seemed so certain. I became skilled at projecting confidence I didn't feel, Edric admitted. My father died so suddenly. There was no time to learn gradually, to grow into the role. I thought perfection was required, so I aimed for it in all things, including marriage, Lucy added softly. He nodded, acknowledging the truth. I thought being the perfect duke would make me the perfect husband. I didn't understand that what you needed wasn't perfection, but presence. Not duty, but devotion. She reached across the carriage to touch his hand. And what did you need, Edric? What does the man behind the duke truly want? The question caught him off guard. For so long, his own desires had been subjugated to the demands of his position that he scarcely knew how to articulate them. I think, he said slowly, I wanted someone to see me. Not the title, not the estates, not the political influence, just me. And I think you did from the beginning. I was simply too blind to notice. London appeared on the horizon, a sprawling, smoky giant compared to the pastoral peace of Thornfield. Lucy's hand tightened on his as the city's outline grew clearer. It will be different this time, Edric promised, though whether he was reassuring her or himself, he wasn't entirely sure. As their carriage rolled through increasingly crowded streets, Lucy straightened her posture, almost unconsciously assuming the mantle of Duchess once more. Edric noticed the subtle transformation with a pang of concern. We don't have to stay at Harlington House, he offered suddenly. We could take rooms elsewhere, away from the weight of tradition. Lucy considered this, then shook her head. No. If we're to discover whether what we've found can survive in London, we must face it squarely, including your home, our home. Her courage humbled him. As you wish. But remember, we make our own rules now. The carriage turned onto the exclusive street where Harlington House stood, its imposing facade a stark contrast to the cozy warmth of Hawthorne Cottage. As they approached, Edric noticed Lucy's breathing quicken. It's just a house, he reminded her gently. Stones and mortar, nothing more. But they both knew it wasn't true. Harlington House represented everything that had come between them: duty, tradition, expectation. Its very grandeur had once been a cage for Lucy's spirit. As the carriage halted before the grand entrance, the front doors opened. Bennet stood at attention, flanked by a line of servants all eager for a glimpse of their long-absent Duchess. Edric descended first, then turned to help Lucy down. As her feet touched the pavement, he kept her hand in his, a deliberate statement to all who watched. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Bennet said, bowing deeply. "And welcome home, Your Grace," he added to Lucy with equal deference. "Thank you, Bennet," Lucy replied with gentle dignity. "It's good to see you again." As they ascended the steps together, Edric felt Lucy's slight hesitation. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Remember," he whispered, "we make our own rules now." The entrance hall, with its soaring ceiling and marble floor, seemed cavernous after the intimate spaces of Thornfield. Footmen hurried to take their cloaks, maids curtsied deeply, all with barely concealed curiosity about the Duchess who had abandoned her home and now returned on the Duke's arm. "Perhaps you would like to rest before dinner, Your Grace?" Bennet suggested to Lucy. "Your rooms have been prepared as you left them." A shadow crossed Lucy's face at the mention of the separate chambers that had symbolized the distance in their marriage. "Actually," Edric intervened smoothly, "the Duchess will be staying in the blue suite adjacent to mine. Please have her things moved there." Bennet's expression revealed nothing, though his eyebrows rose fractionally. "Of course, Your Grace, right away." As the butler moved off to execute this unexpected order, Lucy turned to Edric with surprise. "The blue suite? But that's traditionally for honored guests, not duchesses?" he finished with a small smile. "As I said, new rules. I thought you might prefer rooms you haven't associated with before." Her eyes softened with understanding. "Thank you." That evening, after they had both rested and changed for dinner, Edric escorted Lucy to the small private dining room rather than the formal one where they had always dined previously. The table was set for two, with candles providing intimate lighting. "No formal dinner tonight?" Lucy asked, noting the absence of the usual procession of footmen. "I thought we might ease back into London life," Edric explained. "Besides, I've grown accustomed to dining without an audience." The meal was simpler than the elaborate affairs that had once been standard at Harlington House, though still more refined than their cottage suppers. Throughout, they talked easily, the comfort they had developed in Thornfield carrying over into this new setting. After dinner, instead of retiring to his study, as had been his invariable habit, Edric suggested they walk in the garden. "The roses should be blooming now," he remarked, offering his arm. The Harlington House gardens were renowned for their formal beauty, a stark contrast to the wild profusion of Hawthorne Cottage's flower beds. Yet as they strolled the gravel paths between precisely trimmed hedges, Edric found himself missing the cheerful disorder of wildflowers and herbs. "It's very controlled," Lucy observed, as if reading his thoughts. "Perhaps too controlled," Edric agreed. "Maybe we should allow a corner to grow wild. Create a little piece of Thornfield here." Lucy looked up at him with surprise. "You would do that? Disrupt the famous Harlington Gardens that have been unchanged for generations? For you?" Without hesitation, the simple declaration hung in the evening air between them, weighted with meaning. Later, as Edric escorted Lucy to her new chambers, they paused in the corridor between their rooms. The familiar awkwardness of formal goodbyes threatened to descend, but Lucy dispelled it with a sudden, impulsive movement. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed a soft kiss to Edric's cheek. "Good night," she whispered, "and thank you for today." Before he could respond, she slipped into her room, leaving him standing in the corridor with his heart racing like a schoolboy's after his first dance. As he entered his own chambers, Edric realized with perfect clarity that the kiss, chaste as it was, had meant more to him than any passionate embrace in his past. For it had been freely given, a gesture of genuine affection rather than duty. And that made all the difference in the world. For what is more precious than a love freely offered, with no obligation behind it but the heart's own choice? News of the Duchess of Harlington's return to London spread through society with the speed only truly juicy gossip can achieve. By morning, Lady Whistledown's gossip sheet featured the development prominently. This author can exclusively report that the long-absent Duchess of Harlington has returned to her marital home, looking remarkably well for a lady who has spent a year in rural exile. More intriguing still, reliable sources observe that His Grace has been seen. Prepare yourselves, dear readers, smiling in her presence. One can only speculate what miraculous transformation has occurred to melt the famous frost between them. Lucy read the column with a mixture of amusement and trepidation over breakfast. It seems our private matters remain public entertainment. Edric, seated beside her, rather than at the opposite end of the table, as had once been their custom, took the paper from her hands. Ignore it. London will always gossip, but we need not dance to its tune. Easy to say, Lucy replied. Harder to practice when we must eventually face society. Must we? Edric mused. What if we simply didn't? What if we created our own society, invited only those who truly matter to us? Lucy's eyebrows rose. The Duke of Harlington, social revolutionary? I hardly know what to think. He laughed, enjoying her teasing tone. Not revolution merely, selective participation. We have the luxury of choice after all. Before Lucy could respond, Bennet entered with the morning mail on a silver salver. Invitations have already begun arriving, Your Grace, he noted, with the faintest hint of dry humor. Indeed, the tray held at least a dozen elegantly addressed envelopes, evidence of society's eager curiosity about their reconciliation. I imagine we're the most fascinating entertainment since the royal marriage, Lucy sighed, fingering one particularly ornate invitation. Edric covered her hand with his own. We participate only in what brings us joy, he said firmly. No more obligations for obligation's sake. Her smile, still cautious but warming, was all the reward he needed. That afternoon, while Lucy rested, Edric met with Bennet in his study to address the business that had accumulated during his absence. Letters from estate managers, correspondence from political allies, requests for patronage, the everyday demands of a dukedom that once had consumed his every waking hour. Parliament reconvenes tomorrow, Your Grace, Bennet reminded him. Lord Liverpool's faction is eager for your support on the trade bill. Edric nodded absently, his attention caught by a letter from his head gardener requesting guidance on the season's planting. I'd like to redesign a portion of the East Garden, he said suddenly. Something less formal, more natural. Bennet's surprise was evident only in the slight pause before his response. Of course, Your Grace. I'll arrange for several landscape architects to submit proposals. No need, Edric countered. The Duchess has quite a gift for garden design. We'll work on it together. The secretary made a note, his expression professionally neutral despite the unprecedented nature of the request. The Duke consulting his wife on estate matters was a novelty indeed. Is there anything else the Duchess might wish to redesign, Your Grace? Bennet ventured carefully. Edric looked up, understanding the deeper question. Possibly everything, Bennet. And it's about time, don't you think? A rare smile crossed the secretary's austere features. Indeed, Your Grace. Long overdue, some might say. Later that evening, as Edric and Lucy prepared to face their first social engagement, a small dinner at Lady Danbury's, the tension between them was palpable. It's only dinner, Edric reassured her, as their carriage approached the Danbury townhouse. 12 people at most. 12 people with 48 eyes and 24 ears, all focused on us, Lucy replied, smoothing her gown nervously. She had chosen a simple design in deep blue, elegant, but far less ostentatious than what might be expected of a duchess. "Let them look," Edric said, taking her gloved hand. "Let them see a duke who is madly in love with his duchess." What could be more natural than that? Lucy's eyes widened at his bold declaration, but before she could respond, the carriage halted and a footman opened the door. The moment they entered Lady Danbury's drawing room, conversation dimmed noticeably. Every head turned, every gaze assessed and measured. Lady Danbury herself swept forward, her formidable presence cutting through the awkward silence. "Harlington, and her Grace, how delightful to have you both. Come, you must tell me everything about your countryside sojourn." As the elderly dowager led them into the room, whispers resumed behind fluttering fans. Lucy's grip on Edric's arm tightened, but she held her head high, the dignity she had displayed in Thornfield serving her equally well in this more challenging arena. Throughout dinner, they were subjected to pointed questions, thinly veiled as polite conversation. "Tell me, Duchess," Lady Pembroke inquired sweetly, "did you find country life terribly limiting after the stimulation of London?" "Not at all," Lucy replied with equal sweetness. "I found it remarkably freeing." "And you, Duke," Lord Kensington interjected, "did you discover any rustic pursuits to your liking?" There was an unmistakable undertone to the question, a hint of masculine ribaldry that once Edric might have indulged or ignored. Now it struck him as both tasteless and disrespectful to Lucy. "I discovered that true happiness requires neither grand surroundings nor societal approval," he replied coolly. "A revelation I recommend to everyone." A charged silence followed his response, broken only when Lady Danbury laughed outright. "Well said, Harlington. It seems country air has given you both a refreshing directness." As the evening progressed, Edric remained close to Lucy, their united front unmistakable. When they finally departed, he sensed her exhaustion despite her composed demeanor. "You were magnificent," he told her as they settled into their carriage. "Every inch a duchess, yet entirely yourself." "It was draining," she admitted. "All those questions, those assumptions. I felt like an exotic specimen being examined under glass." "We don't have to attend another event for a month if you prefer," Edric offered. "Or ever, for that matter." Lucy shook her head. "No. If we're to make a life here, we can't hide away. We must reshape society's expectations of us, not flee from them." Her resilience moved him deeply. "Have I told you today how remarkable you are?" A smile softened her tired features. "Not in the last hour or so." "An unforgivable oversight," he murmured, raising her hand to his lips. The following days fell into a new pattern, one neither as formal as their previous London life, nor as unstructured as their Thornfield existence. Edric attended Parliament in the mornings, but returned for luncheon with Lucy, rather than dining at his club. Afternoons might find them working together on plans for the East Garden, reading in the library, or attending carefully selected engagements. A week after their return, Lucy expressed a desire to visit an orphanage she had once patronized. "I used to read to the children every Thursday," she explained, "before everything." "Then we shall go together," Edric decided immediately, "if you don't mind my company." Lucy's surprise was evident. "You want to visit an orphanage? You never showed interest in such charitable work before." "I never showed interest in many things that matter to you," he acknowledged. "I'm trying to remedy that oversight." The orphanage, a modest brick building in a less fashionable district, welcomed Lucy with obvious delight. The matron, a practical woman of middle years, made no attempt to hide her pleasure. "The children have missed your stories dreadfully, Your Grace, and how kind of His Grace to accompany you," she added with a curtsy to Edric, who felt distinctly out of place among the simple furnishings and eager young faces. As Lucy settled into a chair surrounded by children, Edric hung back, uncertain of his role in this unfamiliar tableau. She noticed his discomfort and patted the seat beside her. "His Grace is an excellent reader," she told the children. "Perhaps he might share today's story with us?" Before Edric could protest, a small book was thrust into his hands and a dozen expectant faces turned toward him. Looking down, he discovered a simple tale about a rabbit's adventures. He began awkwardly, then caught Lucy's encouraging smile. Something in him softened, and he opened the book. Once upon a time, there was a very curious rabbit. He read hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as the children's rapt attention bolstered his resolve. By the story's end, he found himself enjoying the performance, even adding different voices for various characters, something he would never have imagined himself doing a month earlier. The children's applause was spontaneous and uninhibited. One small girl, no more than 5, crawled into his lap without ceremony to examine the illustrations more closely. Edric froze, startled by this casual invasion of his ducal person. Then, slowly, he relaxed, allowing the child to turn pages with sticky fingers while pointing out details he had missed. "You're a natural," Lucy observed later as they departed, her voice warm with approval. "Hardly that," Edric demurred. "But it was rewarding in a way I hadn't expected. Children have a gift for seeing past titles to the person beneath," she remarked. "Rather like the villagers of Thornfield." The comparison gave him pause. "I've lived so long behind the shield of my position that I'd almost forgotten who I was without it." Lucy took his arm as they walked to their waiting carriage. "I'm glad you're rediscovering that man. I find I rather like him." That evening, a messenger arrived at Harlington House bearing a note for Lucy. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and she opened it with mild curiosity that quickly turned to distress. "What is it?" Edric asked, noting her sudden pallor. "It's from Mrs. Fenwick in Thornfield, the woman who had the difficult birth. Her baby has taken ill, and they fear—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but her distress was evident. Without hesitation, Edric crossed to the bell pull. "I'll have Bennett arrange for the carriage immediately. We can leave for Thornfield tonight." Lucy stared at him in surprise. "We? But your parliamentary duties—" "Can wait," he finished firmly. "This matters to you, therefore it matters to me." The journey to Thornfield was hastily arranged, the Duke and Duchess departing London with minimal luggage and maximum speed. They traveled through the night, arriving at the village as dawn broke. Mrs. Fenwick's cottage was modest even by village standards. Inside they found the young mother pale with exhaustion, her husband pacing anxiously, and Dr. Peters examining the tiny infant whose labored breathing filled the small room. Lucy went immediately to Mrs. Fenwick's side, taking her hand with the natural compassion Edric had come to admire. He hung back, feeling superfluous until Dr. Peters approached. "Your Grace," the doctor acknowledged with surprise. "I didn't expect—" "What's needed?" Edric interrupted, dispensing with formalities. "For the child's care, whatever it is, I'll provide it." The doctor blinked, then recovered his professional demeanor. "The baby has lung fever. What he needs most is constant care, warmth, and if possible, a special tincture of herbs that's difficult to obtain." "Mr. Howard would have it," Lucy suggested from across the room. "His remedies—" "I'll go immediately," Edric volunteered. Before anyone could respond, he was out the door and striding purposefully toward Hawthorne Cottage. The early morning air was crisp, the village just beginning to stir. Mr. Howard answered his knock promptly, as if he'd been expecting visitors. His eyebrows rose at the sight of the Duke on his doorstep, disheveled from travel and visibly concerned. "Well, well," the old man remarked. "This is unexpected. A child is ill, the Fenwick baby. Dr. Peters mentioned a tincture of herbs you might have?" Understanding immediately, Mr. Howard gestured Edric inside and moved to a cabinet filled with carefully labeled bottles. "Lung fever, is it? Poor mite. This should help, if given every 2 hours." He handed Edric a small amber bottle. "Lucy knows the proper dosage, 4 drops in a teaspoon of honey water." Edric accepted the bottle carefully. "Thank you. I should return quickly." "A moment, Duke," Mr. Howard said, his shrewd gaze assessing. "You've come all the way from London for this?" "Lucy was concerned," Edric explained simply. The old man nodded slowly. "And once, that would not have been reason enough for you to abandon your important duties." "Once," Edric agreed. "I was a fool who didn't understand what truly mattered." A smile creased Mr. Howard's weathered face. Then it seems Thornfield has taught you something valuable indeed. More than I can express, Edric replied honestly, before hurrying back to the Fenwicks' cottage. For the next 2 days, he and Lucy remained in the village, taking shifts with the anxious parents to care for the sick infant. Edric learned to administer medicine, to change linens, to hold a tiny body against his chest where his heartbeat might soothe fevered dreams. On the 3rd morning, the baby's fever broke. His breathing eased and color returned to his tiny face. The relief in the cottage was palpable, the gratitude of the parents overwhelming. "We can never repay you your graces," Mrs. Fenwick said tearfully. "To think, a duke and duchess tending our little Thomas through the night." "No repayment is necessary," Lucy assured her. "Your son's health is all that matters." As they finally departed, promising to look in again before returning to London, Edric found himself unexpectedly moved by the experience. The vulnerability of the child, the fierce love of the parents, the simple human drama of life struggling against illness, all had affected him deeply. "You're very quiet," Lucy observed as they walked toward Hawthorne Cottage, where they had arranged to stay during their impromptu visit. "I'm processing," Edric admitted. "I've spent my life managing vast estates, influencing legislation that affects thousands. Yet, I'm not certain I've ever done anything as meaningful as helping that one child survive." Lucy squeezed his arm gently. "That's the paradox, isn't it? Sometimes the smallest actions carry the greatest significance." At Hawthorne Cottage, Mr. Howard welcomed them warmly, insisting they stay for dinner despite their travel-worn appearance. As they sat around the familiar table, enjoying simple food and companionable conversation, Edric found himself comparing this moment to the grand dinner at Lady Danbury's. The contrast could not have been more stark or more illuminating. "You seem pensive, Your Grace," Mr. Howard remarked as they lingered over apple tart. "I was thinking about authenticity," Edric replied, "about the difference between social obligations and true connections." The old man nodded approvingly. "A worthy contemplation for any man, especially one in your position." Later, as they prepared for bed in the cottage's small guest chamber, Lucy observed Edric's continued thoughtfulness. "You're still troubled," she noted, brushing out her hair at the simple dressing table. He shook his head. "Not troubled, clarified perhaps. Being here again, helping the Fenwicks, sharing your grandfather's table. It's reinforced something I began to understand during our time apart, which is that a meaningful life isn't measured by status or wealth or power," he said slowly. "It's measured by love given and received, by connections that nourish rather than constrain." Lucy set down her brush, turning to face him fully. "And has your life been meaningful by that measure?" It was the most direct question she had asked about their reconciliation, and Edric recognized its importance. "Not always," he admitted honestly. "For too long I confused position with purpose. But now," he crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her to take both her hands in his. "Now I understand that the most meaningful moments of my life have been with you. In grand ballrooms when you smiled at me across a crowded floor. In Thornfield's meadows when you taught me about wildflowers. In a humble cottage, watching you comfort a frightened mother." Lucy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Edric, I love you," he said simply. "Not as a duke loves his duchess, but as a man loves the woman who makes his world infinitely richer by her presence in it." For a long moment Lucy was silent, her hands trembling slightly in his. Then, with a movement both deliberate and tender, she leaned forward to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration of new territory. Then, as Edric responded with equal tenderness, it deepened into something more profound, a wordless communication of forgiveness offered and accepted, of love that had weathered separation and emerged stronger. When they finally parted, both breathless, Lucy rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I never stopped, even when I left. Perhaps especially then." The admission, so long awaited, so deeply desired, filled Edric with a joy unlike anything he had ever known. not the satisfaction of duty fulfilled or ambition achieved, but the pure, uncomplicated happiness of being loved for himself alone. That night, they slept peacefully in each other's arms, the simple cottage bed more luxurious than any in Harlington House, because they shared it with open hearts. For what greater wealth can there be than love freely given, with no obligation behind it but the heart's own choice? The return to London brought new challenges and opportunities for Edric and Lucy. Society watched with avid interest as the once cold Duke escorted his Duchess to carefully selected events, their obvious affection for each other feeding the gossip mills for weeks. "They say he reads to orphans now," Lady Pembroke reported to her circle. "The Duke of Harlington, reading children's stories, and apparently they're redesigning the famous gardens into some wild country style. It's positively revolutionary." Indeed, the transformation at Harlington House continued apace. The East Garden was replanted according to Lucy's vision, wildflowers mingling with traditional roses, herbs bordering formal paths, a sense of natural abundance replacing rigid geometry. More significant were the internal changes. The Duke now frequently worked from home, moving his desk from the isolated grandeur of his study to the sunny morning room, where Lucy often sat reading or writing her children's stories. "Bennett will think you've lost your mind," Lucy teased one afternoon, as Edric instructed footmen to move yet another bookcase into their now shared space. "Bennett has adapted admirably to my many recent eccentricities," Edric replied with a grin. "Besides, I work better when I can look up and see you." Such casual declarations of affection still brought a blush to Lucy's cheeks, though they had become wonderfully common in the weeks since their reconciliation in Thornfield. "Your new agricultural bill seems to be progressing well," she remarked, gesturing to the papers spread across his desk. "Lord Liverpool mentioned at Lady Danbury's that your coalition is growing." Edric looked up in surprise. "You discussed agricultural policy with Liverpool?" "I may have suggested a few modifications to the tenant-farmer protections," Lucy admitted. He seemed quite receptive. Edric set down his pen, regarding her with newfound appreciation. "You never cease to amaze me. Have you been interested in agricultural reform all this time? I grew up in the country, remember? Grandfather taught me the importance of sustainable farming practices long before they became fashionable topics in Parliament. Why didn't you ever mention it before?" Lucy's smile turned wistful. "You never asked, and I never presumed my opinions on such matters would be welcome." The simple truth of her statement struck Edric forcefully. How many of her thoughts, interests, and insights had he missed during those early years of their marriage? "I'm asking now," he said, pushing aside his papers. "Tell me everything you think about this bill, about any subject that interests you. I want to know your mind, Lucy, in all its fascinating complexity." The conversation that followed lasted well into the evening, ranging from agricultural reform to education for village children, to the moral responsibilities of landowning peers. Throughout, Edric found himself repeatedly astonished by the depth of Lucy's knowledge and the clarity of her thinking. "You should speak in the Lords," he declared as they finally retired for the night. Lucy laughed outright. "Women in Parliament. Now you truly have become revolutionary." "Perhaps the time for such revolution is coming," he mused, drawing her into his arms. "And if so, I can think of no one better to lead it than you." Their newfound partnership extended beyond policy discussions. When one of Edric's tenant farmers fell ill, Lucy suggested they visit the family personally rather than sending an agent. When Lucy wished to expand her work with orphan children, Edric not only supported the initiative, but actively participated, using his influence to secure funding and properties. Together, they were creating something neither had quite envisioned before: a marriage of true equals, each enhancing the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. Not that the path was always smooth. London society, while fascinated by their transformation, was not universally supportive. Some traditional peers found the Duke's new approach undignified. Certain ladies whispered that the Duchess had somehow bewitched her husband into abandoning proper aristocratic reserve. "Lady Whitmore actually asked me what spell I had cast on you," Lucy reported with amusement after a particularly tedious tea. I was tempted to make mysterious gestures and mumble incantations just to see her reaction. Edric laughed, pulling her onto his lap, despite the impropriety of such behavior in the middle of the afternoon. Tell her it was a potent mixture of intelligence, compassion, and courage that no man of sense could resist. "You forgot, beauty," Lucy teased, winding her arms around his neck. "Never," he assured her, drawing her closer for a kiss that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Later, as they lay tangled in the sheets of their now shared bed, Lucy traced idle patterns on Edric's chest. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The unquestioned authority? The perfect order of your previous life?" Edric considered the question seriously, knowing she deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes," he admitted, "there are moments when the weight of tradition pulls at me. When I hear my father's voice in my head, questioning whether I've gone too far in abandoning certain conventions." He shifted to look directly into her eyes. "But then I remember the emptiness of that perfectly ordered life, the coldness of unquestioned authority, and I realize I've traded an empty perfection for a far messier happiness." Lucy's smile illuminated her entire face. "Messier indeed, especially with the changes coming." "Changes?" Edric questioned, suddenly alert. "What changes?" With delicious deliberation, Lucy took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "In about 7 months, Harlington House will become considerably noisier," she said softly. For a moment, Edric could only stare at her in stunned silence. Then joy erupted like a fountain, and he gathered her into his arms with a whoop of delight that would have scandalized his former self. "A baby?" he managed when coherent speech returned. "You're certain?" Lucy nodded, her own happiness evident in the glow of her face. "Dr. Peters confirmed it when we were last in Thornfield. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you." "Every moment with you is the right moment," Edric declared, kissing her with fervent gratitude. "Lucy, this is... I don't even have words." The eloquent Duke of Harlington, speechless? "Our child has already performed a miracle." Our child. The phrase echoed in Edric's mind, filling him with equal parts elation and humility. To think that their love, once so nearly lost through pride and misunderstanding, would now create new life. Boy or girl, this child will know they are loved for exactly who they are, he vowed. Titles and expectations be damned. "Such language, Your Grace," Lucy teased, though her eyes shone with approval. "What would society say?" "Let them say what they will," Edric replied, his hand still resting protectively over their growing child. "We answer to no one but each other now." The news of the impending Harlington heir spread through London with predictable speed. Congratulations poured in from every quarter, along with a deluge of advice on everything from nursery decor to the proper selection of governesses. "According to Lady Whitmore, we should already have engaged a French nurse, a music master, and a deportment instructor," Lucy reported, sorting through the morning's correspondence. "The child isn't even born, and already society has planned its entire education." "Perhaps we should scandalize everyone and raise the child ourselves," Edric suggested, only half in jest. "Now that would cause a sensation," Lucy agreed. "Almost as shocking as a duke who changes his own child's nappies." "I shall practice immediately," Edric declared, picking up a napkin and folding it with mock seriousness. "How difficult can it be?" Their laughter echoed through rooms that had once known only stiff formality, a sound that both servants and frequent visitors had come to associate with the new spirit of Harlington House. As Lucy's pregnancy advanced, they divided their time between London and Thornfield, finding that the village's peaceful rhythms provided a welcome respite from the capital's demands. Mr. Howard was delighted by the news of a great-grandchild, immediately beginning work on a cradle carved from oak grown on his own land. "The finest wood for the finest child," he declared, showing Edric his progress with justifiable pride. "It's beautiful," Edric acknowledged, running a hand over the smooth curves. "You have a remarkable gift." "Just another country skill," the old man replied with a twinkle in his eye. "Like recognizing a good man beneath a fancy title." The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Edric threw himself into readying both homes for the baby's arrival with an enthusiasm that both amused and touched Lucy. He personally supervised the renovation of nurseries, researched the latest theories on infant care, and even learned to knit under the patient tutelage of Mrs. Thwaite, the village pie maker. The Duke of Harlington knitting booties, Lucy marveled as she watched his large hands awkwardly manipulate the needles. If only Lady Whistledown could see you now. She'd have material for a month of columns, Edric agreed cheerfully. But I don't care. Our child will have the warmest feet in England, even if these booties are somewhat irregular. Lucy's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her daily. Who would have thought that the cold, duty-bound Duke she had left would transform into this tender, joyful, expectant father? As her time grew near, they settled in Thornfield, having decided the village's simpler surroundings and Lucy's trust in Dr. Peters made it the ideal place for the birth. Harlington House's grandeur could wait until mother and child were ready to travel. The baby, however, had plans of its own. 2 weeks before the expected date, Lucy woke in the pre-dawn hours, her hand instinctively seeking Edric's. "It's time," she said simply. What followed was a day of both terror and wonder for Edric. Barred from the birthing room by tradition, he paced the cottage garden until Mr. Howard took pity on him. "Come inside, Duke," the old man instructed. "If you wear a trench in my lawn, the village children will fall and break their necks." "How can you be so calm?" Edric demanded, accepting a glass of brandy with shaking hands. "She's in pain. I should be with her." "Birth is women's business," Mr. Howard replied, though without the dismissive tone such statements usually carried. "Lucy is strong, and Dr. Peters is skilled. All will be well." "But what if—" "Faith, Duke," the old man interrupted gently. "In Lucy, in life itself, some things cannot be controlled, only trusted." The wisdom in these words gradually calmed Edric's frantic worry. He settled into an uneasy vigil, listening for any sound from upstairs, praying with an intensity he hadn't felt since childhood. As evening approached, Dr. Peters finally appeared in the doorway, his face tired but triumphant. "Congratulations, Your Grace. You have a daughter, a perfect, healthy daughter." Edric's knees nearly buckled with relief and joy. "And Lucy?" "Tired but well. She's asking for you." He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with anticipation. At the bedroom door he paused, suddenly uncertain. Then, gathering his courage, he knocked softly. "Come in," Lucy's voice called, weary but unmistakably happy. The scene that greeted him etched itself permanently in his memory. Lucy propped against pillows, her hair loose and damp with exertion, her face glowing despite obvious fatigue, and in her arms, a tiny bundle wrapped in soft white linen. "Meet your daughter, Edric," she said softly. He approached the bed with reverence, carefully sitting on its edge to peer at the small face nestled against Lucy's breast. Impossibly delicate features, a wisp of dark hair, perfect miniature fingers clutching the edge of her blanket. The sight overwhelmed him with love so fierce it nearly stopped his breath. "She's miraculous," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger that his daughter promptly grasped with surprising strength. Like her mother. Lucy's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Would you like to hold her?" With infinite care, Edric gathered his daughter into his arms, marveling at her lightness, her perfect completeness, the absolute trust with which she settled against his chest. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father, and I promise you this. You will always be loved for exactly who you are, not for any title or position you might inherit." The baby blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, then yawned delicately before settling into sleep, apparently satisfied with this introduction to the Duke of Harlington. "What shall we name her?" Lucy asked, watching father and daughter with contented exhaustion. Edric considered the tiny face before him. "I thought perhaps Hope, for what she represents to us both." "Hope," Lucy repeated softly. "Lady Hope Harlington. It's perfect." And so, in a simple cottage bedroom far from London's splendor, a new chapter began for the Duke and Duchess, one filled with midnight feedings and first smiles, with lullabies and tiny discoveries, with the profound joy that comes from creating a family built on love rather than obligation. For what greater miracle exists than the chance to begin again, to create from love's healing a future brighter than either could have imagined alone? 3 months later, Harlington House hosted its most unusual social event to date, a christening celebration that brought together London aristocracy and Thornfield villagers in unprecedented mingling. Lady Hope Harlington, resplendent in an heirloom christening gown that had adorned Harlington heirs for generations, behaved with impressive decorum throughout the church service. Only when the bishop sprinkled holy water on her forehead did she register a brief, indignant squawk before settling back into her father's arms. "She has your dignity," Lucy whispered to Edric as they processed out of the church. "And my willingness to voice complaints." "A formidable combination," he agreed, gazing adoringly at their daughter, whose dark eyes, already showing hints of Lucy's blue, surveyed the world with remarkable alertness for one so young. The reception that followed broke with tradition in numerous ways. Rather than the formal, adults-only affair that might have been expected, the Harlington Gardens had been transformed into a festival-like atmosphere reminiscent of Thornfield's village fair. Children from the orphanage Lucy patronized played alongside the offspring of earls and viscounts. Mrs. Thwaite's legendary pies sat on the same buffet table as elaborate French confections. Mr. Howard, as great-grandfather to the guest of honor, was given a place of honor equal to any duke or marquis present. "Quite the revolutionary gathering," observed Lady Danbury, who had appointed herself unofficial godmother to Hope, despite not being named in the official ceremony. "You've managed to scandalize at least half the ton, Harlington." "Only half? I must try harder," Edric replied with a grin that would have been unthinkable in his previous incarnation. The elderly dowager cackled with delight. Who would have thought that cold, proper duke would become society's most interesting rebel? Love has certainly transformed you. For the better, I trust. Lady Danbury's sharp eyes softened as she watched Lucy showing baby Hope to a circle of admiring village children. "Indisputably for the better, my boy. You've discovered what truly matters before it was too late. Not all men are so fortunate." Later, as the celebration continued under lanterns strung through the garden trees, Edric found himself momentarily alone with his daughter. Lucy had been drawn into conversation with Dr. Peters about expanding medical care for Thornfield's poorest residents, her passion for the project evident in her animated gestures. "Your mother is remarkable," Edric told Hope, who gazed up at him with solemn attention. "And you, my little lady, will grow up knowing that you can be equally remarkable in whatever way suits your heart. No cage of duty and expectation for you." "Making revolutionary promises to our daughter already?" Lucy asked, appearing at his side and slipping her arm through his. "Merely ensuring she understands her options," Edric replied, shifting Hope so she could see her mother. The baby immediately brightened, tiny hands reaching toward Lucy with unmistakable recognition. "She knows exactly who provides her meals," Edric observed with mock disappointment. "And who sings to her at 3 a.m, Lucy countered, kissing his cheek affectionately. "Don't pretend you don't have her thoroughly enchanted." It was true. Despite all precedent and tradition, Edric had insisted on being actively involved in Hope's care from the beginning. He had scandalized the nursery staff by learning to change nappies, by walking the halls with a colicky infant in the small hours, by sometimes bringing her into parliamentary meetings tucked discreetly in a sling across his chest. "The Duke brings his baby to debates on the Corn Laws," society whispered, equal parts scandalized and fascinated. Yet for every critic, there seemed to be 2 admirers of the Duke's new approach. Younger peers, particularly, began to reconsider their own involvement in their children's lives. Ladies who had previously accepted maternal distance as the aristocratic norm found themselves inspired by Lucy's hands-on mothering. "You're starting a fashion," teased Lord Kensington, himself a new father. "Next season, every peer will be required to have an infant accessory to be considered truly modish." As the christening celebration continued into evening, Lucy and Edric eventually slipped away from the main festivities, taking Hope for a quiet moment in the newly wild section of the East Garden. Here, among naturalistic plantings inspired by Thornfield's meadows, they found a secluded bench beneath a blooming apple tree. "Happy?" Edric asked, his arm around Lucy's shoulders as she nursed Hope discreetly beneath a light shawl. "Beyond anything I could have imagined a year ago," she admitted, leaning into his embrace. "When I left, I hoped for peace, for respect. I never dared dream of such complete happiness." Edric pressed a kiss to her temple. "When you left, I thought my world had ended. I couldn't imagine anything worse than the public humiliation of a duchess who abandoned her duty. And now I understand it was the best thing that could have happened to us both." His voice grew serious. "You had the courage to demand more than duty, Lucy, to insist that love should be the foundation of our marriage, not merely an occasional visitor. You saved us." Hope finished nursing and dozed off against her mother's chest, the picture of contented security. Looking at his wife and daughter in the soft evening light, Edric felt a wave of gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. "I have a gift for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A token of this new beginning." He pressed a small velvet box into Lucy's free hand. Opening it, she found a locket of unusual design, not the elaborate golden jewels one might expect from a duke to his duchess, but a simple silver oval engraved with a sprig of forget-me-nots, the wildflower she had first taught him to identify in Thornfield's meadow. "Open it," he urged gently. Inside were two miniature portraits, one of Hope, her solemn baby face captured with remarkable accuracy, and one of Edric himself, not in ducal regalia, but in the simple attire he had worn during their Thornfield reconciliation. "So you'll always have us close to your heart," he explained, "no matter where duty takes us." Lucy's eyes filled with tears of joy. "It's perfect. Exactly what I would have chosen." With tender care for the sleeping infant between them, Edric fastened the locket around Lucy's neck, letting his fingers linger against her skin. "I have something for you as well," Lucy said once she had composed herself, "though it's not so elegantly packaged." From her own pocket, she drew a folded paper, somewhat crumpled from being carried. "I've been working on this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Edric unfolded it carefully to find a poem written in Lucy's graceful hand. "What duty bound, love has set free. What pride once severed, truth restored. The heart that left to find itself returns complete to love's reward. Not duke and duchess, bound by name, but man and woman joined in soul. Two separate journeys merged as one. Two broken halves now rendered whole. And from this love, a new life springs. A promise for the years ahead. The greatest gift, the purest joy. A future built on trust instead. So let the whispers come and go. Let judgment fall where it may land. The only verdict that endures is love's own truth, now hand in hand." The simple verse, heartfelt and honest, moved Edric more deeply than any elaborate literary work. "You've captured everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Everything that matters." "I've been thinking," Lucy said, adjusting the sleeping Hope to a more comfortable position, "about writing more than children's stories. Perhaps a novel, exploring how love and duty might be reconciled without sacrificing either." "You should," Edric encouraged immediately. "Your insight on the subject is unparalleled." "I'd publish anonymously, of course," she added. "A duchess novelist would cause quite the scandal." "Let it," Edric replied with the confidence of a man who had discovered that some scandals were worth embracing. "The world could use more truth about love, however it arrives." As darkness descended fully on the garden, distant sounds of the continuing celebration reached them, music, laughter, the occasional burst of applause. Their guests were enjoying themselves without the hosts, another break with tradition that somehow seemed perfectly appropriate. "We should return," Lucy said reluctantly. "It's our party, after all." "In a moment," Edric replied, unwilling to end this perfect interlude. "I want to remember this exactly as it is, you, me, Hope, this garden, this evening, a moment of absolute contentment. Lucy smiled, understanding. Not the perfection of duty fulfilled, but the messier, truer happiness of love lived fully. Precisely. Edric lifted Hope gently from Lucy's arms, cradling the sleeping infant against his shoulder with practiced ease. With his free hand, he helped Lucy to her feet, then drew her close for a kiss that held all the promise of their renewed love. Together, the three of them made their way back toward the lights and music of the celebration. A family transformed by love's second chance, moving forward into a future bright with possibility. And as for the Duke and Duchess of Harlington? Society continued to whisper, of course. Some called them eccentric, others revolutionary. But those who looked closest saw the truth. They had discovered that love, not duty, was the truest foundation for a meaningful life. That sometimes the bravest act is walking away from what no longer serves the heart. That often the most precious gift is the courage to begin again. And always the greatest duty of all is to love fully, honestly, and without reservation. For what greater legacy could any Duke and Duchess leave than the proof that true love can heal even the deepest wounds, bridging the distance between duty and desire, between title and truth, between what society demands and what the heart requires. Love demands courage, the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to change deeply ingrained patterns. The Duke and Duchess's journey reminds us that relationships thrive not on perfection, but on genuine connection and growth. Sometimes we must step away from what is comfortable to discover what is truly meaningful. Lucy's departure wasn't an ending, but the beginning of a deeper understanding between two people who had lost sight of each other beneath the weight of expectation. In our own lives, we may find ourselves caught between duty and desire, between others' expectations and our own heart's wisdom. The true path forward lies not in choosing one over the other, but in finding the courage to reimagine both. To create a life where duty is infused with love and love is strengthened by commitment. Remember that it's never too late for a second chance. Whether in love, work, or personal growth, the power to begin again is always within reach for those brave enough to claim it. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of love, redemption, and the courage to follow your heart. Like this video, share it with others who might need a reminder of love's transformative power, and leave a comment about your own experiences with second chances. Until next time, remember that the greatest adventure is always love.